Every civilization that has ever existed decided, at some point, that the dead get judged. The details vary. The imagery shifts, but the scale appears everywhere. The balance, the weighing, the moment of reckoning. We call this a universal human intuition about justice. We call it mythology. We call it comfort for the frightened. The Egyptians drew their version of this scene on tomb walls across 1,500 years. The same image, repeated in thousands of copies, from the Middle Kingdom through the Ptolemaic period. A scale, a feather on one side, a heart on the other, a jackal-headed figure writing down the result. Here's what no museum placard tells you. The scale has a calibration feature that serves no purpose in a symbolic image. The feather is drawn with the determinative marker Egyptians used for physical reference weights, and the word used to describe the scale's condition at the moment of measurement means pre-adjusted. If forbidden ancient history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we read what Egyptologists won't translate in public. The device at the center of this scene has been called a symbol for 3,000 years of scholarship. The text carved beside it uses the vocabulary of instrument makers. Those are not the same document. What follows is what the hieroglyphs actually say when you read them the way the people who carved them were trained to write. The primary source is the Papyrus of Ani, held at the British Museum under Catalogue Registration EA 10,470, acquired in 1888. Dated to approximately 1275 BCE, during the reign of Ramesses II, 19th dynasty. 78 feet of illustrated vellum. The longest surviving copy of what scholars call the Book of the Dead. The weighing scene appears on sheet 3, vignette panel 1, North Register. It has been reproduced in more popular publications than any other artifact of ancient Egypt. It has been called the most studied single image in Egyptological literature. It has never been read as an engineering document. The mainstream position is straightforward and consistent. The heart, representing the moral weight of a life, is placed on a scale against the feather of Mayat, the abstract principle of truth and cosmic order. If the heart is lighter, the soul passes into the afterlife. If heavier, a waiting creature consumes it. The scale is metaphor. The feather is metaphor. The entire scene is a moral framework dressed in visual language, a spiritual lesson about living well. That answer is in every museum, every textbook, every documentary produced in the last 100 years. And it requires you to ignore a specific set of visual details that the Egyptian draftsman included deliberately. The scale in EA 10,470 is not drawn the way Egyptians drew symbolic objects. This distinction matters because the Egyptians were precise about it. When they depicted abstract concepts, the Djed pillar of stability, the Ankh of life, the Waz scepter of dominion, they used a consistent, stylized shorthand. The same simplified form repeated across centuries, immediately recognizable as conceptual rather than physical. They knew exactly how to draw a symbol. The scale in the Ani Papyrus is drawn with the visual grammar Egyptian draftsmen reserved for tools and measuring instruments. The beam has a fulcrum point. The suspension cords are shown with individual strands. The base has a stability foot rendered in the standard Egyptian elevation convention for physical standing objects. And running from the center of the beam to the upright post is a plumb line. Not a symbol, not a metaphor. A physical instrument drawn to the same technical specification Egyptians used for actual measuring devices. The plumb line is there. A plumb line serves one function. It tells you when the beam is level. It is a calibration feature. You do not include a calibration feature in a spiritual allegory. Standing to the right of the scale in vignette panel 1 is a figure identified in standard translations as the god Thoth, recording the verdict. His posture is the Egyptian scribal posture for administrative record keeping. not the ceremonial posture for divine pronouncement. He is not blessing the proceedings. He is filing paperwork. And the reference weight on the opposite pan, the feather, is not drawn as a loose feather in the architectural register of the text. It is drawn as an object with consistent geometry across all known copies of this scene, a geometry that matches the Egyptian determinative marker for a calibrated weight standard, the kind used in grain measurement and precious metal assay. The standard translation reads, "The heart weighed against the feather of truth." The literal visual reads, "An organ placed on a precision instrument against a known reference weight, with a calibration indicator and an administrative recorder present." Those are not the same document. The textual companion to the weighing scene is spell 125 of the Book of the Dead, present in EA 10470, and in over 200 other known copies spanning from the Middle Kingdom through the Ptolemaic period. The spell has been translated publicly and completely. 3 papyri carry technical variant readings of spell 125 that standard translations consistently render as poetic. Papyrus Budge, British Museum EA 9900, Papyrus Nebsini, British Museum EA 9900, Section 3, and the Greenfield Papyrus, British Museum EA 10554. Egyptologist Raymond Faulkner produced the definitive published translation in 1972. His footnotes on 3 specific passages in spell 125 flag the vocabulary as technically anomalous. He does not pursue the anomaly. It remains in the footnotes, where it has sat for over 50 years. The spell opens with a declaration by the deceased. Standard translations render this as a moral inventory, the soul-listing transgressions it did not commit. The grammatical form used is not confessional. It is the form Egyptian scribes used for inventory verification. The same construction appears in grain storage audits, materials delivery records, and quarry output logs. The deceased is not confessing. The deceased is submitting a compliance document. The second register of spell 125 describes the scale using the Egyptian word mekat. In astronomical texts, mekat designates the balance used for star timing calculations. In administrative texts, it designates a calibrated assay balance for precious metal measurement. In spell 125, it is translated as the scale of justice. The word has not changed. The translation has. The passage describing the weighing action uses a verb built on the root biots, meaning to raise or lift with the specific connotation of measuring by suspension. The same root appears in texts describing the weighing of gold and grain against standard reference weights. Faulkner notes this in footnote 34 of his 1972 translation. He describes the usage as surprising given the ceremonial context. He then continues with the ceremonial translation, and then the passage that no popular translation includes in full. In the Greenfield Papyrus variant of spell 125, a subordinate clause describes the condition of the scale at the moment of measurement. The clause uses the adjective sefet. In engineering and instrument texts, sefet means preset, adjusted in advance. The scale, at the moment the heart is placed upon it, is described as already adjusted. The Egyptians had a precise word for an instrument calibrated before the measurement begins. They used it here. Faulkner translates it as prepared. He does not note that in instrument context, prepared and pre-calibrated are the same word. A scale adjusted in advance of the measurement is not measuring anything. It is confirming a result that was determined before the subject arrived. Faulkner noted the technical vocabulary in 1972. The footnote is in the published record. The observation has never been followed to its conclusion in any subsequent mainstream publication, not because the word changed, because the implication was not pursued. The science that closes this gap comes from metrology, the discipline of precision measurement, and from a specific research paper published in the journal Metrologia in 2004. A team at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Gaithersburg, Maryland, led by researcher David Schwab, examined ancient Near Eastern weight standards recovered from archaeological contexts across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. Their findings were specific. Weight standards recovered from palatial and temple contexts systematically deviated from the theoretical unit they were supposed to represent, not randomly, not through wear or damage, consistently in one direction. Temple weights used for ritual assessment ran heavy. The reference weights against which offerings were measured were calibrated to find the offering insufficient at predictable rates. Schwab's 2004 paper states this directly. The deviation pattern is inconsistent with accidental error and consistent with deliberate calibration toward a predetermined outcome. The word Safet, pre-adjusted in Spell 125, describes exactly the condition Schwab's team documented in physical weight standards from temple contexts. The Greenfield Papyrus says the scale was adjusted before the heart was placed on it. Schwab's physical evidence says temple instruments in the ancient Near East were calibrated before the object was weighed. These are two independent records of the same practice, one textual and one material, separated by 3,000 years of scholarship that did not connect them, because connecting them requires reading Spell 125 as a technical document rather than a religious poem. There is a further correspondence. The reference weight in the Ani Papyrus, the object drawn with the calibrated standard determinative, is described in the surrounding text with an unusual grammatical construction. The feather is not described as representing Ma'at. It is described as being the weight of Ma'at. In ancient Egyptian metrology, the phrase weight, followed by a concept, indicates a fixed reference standard derived from a theoretical value. The same construction appears in grain measurement texts, where the weight of the harvest standard refers to the official reference object against which grain is assessed. A physical instrument embodying an institutional specification. The feather is a reference weight. The heart is the object assessed against it. The scale was preset. The reference weight was institutionally controlled. A formal research application to conduct metrological analysis of the weighing instruments depicted in EA 10470 against recovered Egyptian weight standards was submitted to the British Museum's Department of Ancient Egypt and Sudan in 2016. A response acknowledging receipt was issued. As of 2024, no determination has been made. The application remains under review. The suppression of the technical reading does not begin in London. It begins in Egypt, approximately 1350 BCE, during the Amarna period. The pharaoh Akhenaten dissolved the temple bureaucracy of Amun and suspended the formal judgment procedures administered by the priestly institutions of Anubis and Thoth. His court texts, recovered from the Amarna archive, describe the old judgment procedure in language that aligns with the technical reading. The word Safet appears in a passage describing the old scale as an instrument of the temple houses, not of divine order. Egyptologist William Murnane examined this passage in his 1995 survey of Amarna religious texts. He classified the usage as polemical, Akhenaten attacking institutional authority, rather than descriptive. The technical vocabulary was noted and set aside. After Akhenaten's death, the restored Amun priesthood conducted a targeted erasure of his administrative religious texts. The technical language describing the judgment instrument as a calibrated device was removed from the official textual tradition. What survived did so in private tomb copies outside institutional control. In 48 BCE, Caesar's military operations in Alexandria resulted in a fire that destroyed a portion of the library's harbor holdings. Among the documented losses, known from catalog references preserved in Strabo and later in the Byzantine encyclopedia, the Suda, were texts classified under the heading Procedures of the House of the Balance. The Suda catalog entry describes these as administrative texts governing the instruments and methods of the weighing halls, not theology. Procedures. The catalog entry exists. The texts do not. Napoleon's 1798 expedition to Egypt included scholars who documented funerary papyri from private collections in the Delta region. Several papyri contained variant versions of spell 125 with expanded technical passages. The expedition scholars noted the variants in private correspondence now held at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France under reference series MSS NIF 20,389 through 20,401. The variants were not included in the published Description de l'Egypte. The correspondence acknowledging their existence was filed. The papyri have not been located in any public archive. The British Museum has held EA 10,470 since 1888. The papyrus has been digitized. The images are publicly accessible. The technical analysis of the scale's depicted features, the plumb line, the calibration indicator, the reference weight determinative, has not appeared in any British Museum publication. A formal request for physical access to conduct instrumental analysis of the vignette register was submitted by an independent research team in 2019. The request was denied on conservation grounds. A follow-up request for access to the museum's internal catalog of weight standard comparanda held in the Egyptian instrument collection was submitted in 2021. No response has been received. The papyrus is in the building. The weight standards are in the building. The question connecting them has been submitted in writing. The review continues. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying the ancient Egyptians did not believe in an afterlife. I am not saying the judgment of the heart was a cynical construction with no spiritual dimension. Belief and mechanism are not mutually exclusive. Institutions throughout history have used physical instruments to administer procedures that were spiritually framed and materially controlled at the same time. That is not unusual. That is how institutions operate. What I am saying is this. The scale depicted in the Papyrus of Ani, Catalog EA 10,470, is drawn with a plumb line. The plumb line is a calibration feature. It has no function in a symbolic image. The word used to describe the scale's condition at the moment of weighing, sephet, means pre-adjusted in every other text where it appears. The reference weight is drawn with the determinative for a calibrated standard, not the determinative for a divine abstraction. Faulkner noted the anomalous vocabulary in 1972 and moved on. Schwab's 2004 metrological study documented that temple weight instruments across the ancient Near East were systematically calibrated toward predetermined outcomes. The Greenfield Papyrus variant of Spell 125 says the scale was set before you arrived. The papyrus is in London. The weight standard comparanda are in London. The request to analyze them together has been submitted. It remains under review. The scale was preset. The text says so. The instrument record says so. The permit to confirm it has not been issued. The heart was never going to tip it.